Hey guys, tonight we are tiptoeing into one of history's creepiest neighbourhoods, Victorian London's Whitechapel district. A place so foggy, so overcrowded, and so bafflingly underlit that losing your keys was considered a full contact sport. And in this dim, cold labyrinth of gas lamps and questionable life choices lived a man nobody ever saw. Not because he was a magician, not because he was shy, but because the streets were basically one giant haunted humidifier. Yes, tonight we are talking about why London lived in fear of a man who seemed to materialise out of thin air. Jack the Ripper, the original I was never here champion of hide and seek. Before we step into the fog, go ahead and gently or aggressively tap that like button. Subscribe if you actually enjoy this strange little corner of YouTube where we talk about old-time horrors with the soothing energy of a mildly sedated golden retriever. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, and whether it is indeed once again 2:17 AM. Now dim those lights, turn on a fan for background noise, or maybe for emotional support. Wiggle yourself into a comfortable position. Tuck your feet under the blanket so history's unsolved mysteries can grab your ankles. Just in case. And let's ask the important questions. Have you ever wondered what it's like to live in a city where every shadow feels suspicious? Where crime investigations have all the efficiency of a soggy biscuit? Where people walked around at night even though visibility was roughly pea soup plus anxiety? Did anyone ever think, hey, maybe we should get brighter lamps? Why was everyone constantly outside at 3 AM? And why did every witness describe the same mysterious man as tall, short, thin, stocky, clean-shaven, mustached, foreign, local, and possibly wearing a hat that defied physics? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1888. You're standing in Whitechapel. It is cold, it is foggy, and you're already lost. Good luck. The first thing you notice is the fog thick enough to spread on toast and probably just as nutritious. It swirls around your ankles like a confused house cat, uncertain whether it wants attention or wants you dead. You take a few steps, and the world dissolves into a pale grey soup that feels like it has personal opinions. It settles in your hair, slips into your sleeves, and curls into the collar of your coat, making you question whether this is weather or a sentient Victorian life form conducting psychological warfare. Let's talk about your vision specifically, the fact that you don't really have any. The moment you walk outside, your eyes do absolutely nothing. They are basically decorative. You are navigating by instinct, by memory, and by the faint sound of horses who are also wondering why they can just see where they're going. The fog absorbs everything light, sound, hope, leaving you with the visual clarity of a potato. And look, modern fog is adorable. It's aesthetic. It is something influencers take moody pictures in while wearing oversized sweaters. Victorian fog? Oh no! This fog is industrial. It is a stew of smoke, wet coal fumes, factory exhale, chimney belches, and atmospheric depression. Breathing it in feels like smoking 12 cigarettes at once while someone whispers unpaid bills directly into your lungs. As you walk, the fog thickens until even gas lamps look like shy fireflies, peeking out and then immediately giving up. The lamps technically exist, but only in theory. You squint hard enough to develop wrinkles your descendants will inherit, but all you get is the vague suggestion of light, like someone trying to communicate from across an aquarium. And every sound becomes suspicious. Footsteps echo strangely, bouncing off buildings and turning one person into what sounds like an entire stampede. A distant cough could be 10 feet away or half a mile. A clattering cart might be approaching you, or it might have been recorded 3 days ago by the fog itself, which now replays sounds without warning. Because of course it does. You try to guess where the street ends, where the buildings begin, and where the horses auntie. The uncertainty is refreshing in the I might die, but I'm too tired to care sort of way. Whenever you try to cross the street, you stick one foot out like a Victorian flamingo, hoping you want to step directly into traffic or onto someone's unfortunate pet goose. Let us talk about your clothes. Everything you own is permanently damp, not wet damp, the kind of damp that feels emotional. Your coat clings to you like it is afraid of abandonment. Your scarf smells like moist century-old wool. Every surface of your outfit has absorbed enough fog to develop its own tiny climate. If you stood still long enough, botanists could conduct experiments on you, and the fog isn't just a nuisance. It is the city's accomplice, especially now, in 1888, when London is gripped by fear of a man no one can see. The fog lets him slip from street to street like a rumour. You hear people talking about it constantly. He appeared out of nowhere, they whisper. He vanished in an instant, they murmur. I couldn't see his face, they confess. No kidding. You can barely see your own hands. Everyone looks suspicious when visibility is 1.5 feet. Walking through Whitechapel feels like moving inside a Victorian horror novel written by someone who didn't believe in punctuation. Every corner hides a darker shadow within a shadow. Every silhouette stretches and bends until it becomes a shapeless blur. You're half convinced the fog is actively gaslighting you. And then there are the alleys, narrow, damp, twisting like the city was designed by someone who hated straight lines and personal safety. You try to peer down one, but all you see is deeper, denser fog like the alley is inhaling it on purpose. The silence is eerie, but the noises are worse. A rustle behind you could be a stray dog, a loose newspaper, or your existential dread gaining sentience. But here's the thing. Eventually you get used to it. Humans adapt to anything, including being swallowed by weather with unresolved emotional issues. You walk in slow, careful steps. You learn to trust your ears. You memorize every curve of every street. You listen for the clop of horses, the distant market voices, the uneven rhythm of your own breath. And when the fog finally shifts just enough to show you a sliver of street or the outline of a building, it feels like the city is giving you a tiny reward for not panicking. A small, damp pat on the back. Then the fog rolls back in, thicker than before, like it forgot something and returned for it. Of course it did. This is London. This is Whitechapel. And tonight, the fog hides everything, even the things you wish it didn't. Nighttime here isn't really nighttime. It is more like the universe turned down the brightness to 1. You step outside and instantly feel as though someone applied a dimming filter over reality. The sky isn't black or blue, it's an indistinct smudge, like someone erased the stars in a hurry and forgot to fill the void with anything else. Darkness in Whitechapel isn't peaceful, or pretty, or poetic, it is aggressive. It does not gently fall, it descends like a large damp curtain someone forgot to wash. The streets hum quietly at first, but the more you listen, the more you realize night in this neighborhood has layers. There's the faint rumble of carts still making deliveries, the clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the distant clinking of glasses from taverns refusing to acknowledge closing hours, and the occasional shout, sometimes cheerful, sometimes not, and sometimes from someone practicing the ancient art of yelling at pigeons. Let's talk about the lighting situation, or really the lack of one. Gas lamps stand politely along the roads, but their glow is so faint you begin to question whether Victorian London was trying to conserve electricity, decades before electricity was even a thing. Each lamp emits a soft bubble of light just large enough to illuminate absolutely nothing useful. You step into one of those bubbles hoping for clarity, and instead get the visual equivalent of a shrug. And the shadows? Oh, the shadows have shadows. Everything looks like a silhouette wearing another silhouette as a coat. Even everyday objects become threatening. A stack of crates suddenly looks like a burly man waiting to rob you. A lamppost resembles someone lurking. A pile of laundry briefly convinces you it has intentions. As you walk, You pass clusters of people still awake because Whitechapel doesn't sleep so much as it pauses between disasters. Dock workers trudge home in groups, their boots echoing like someone dropping rocks into a metal bucket. Market vendors linger to guard their carts, swatting at the cold air and muttering to themselves about customers who haggled too aggressively. Women chat in low tones near street corners, wrapped in shawls and suspicion. And lone men glide through the fog with the kind of quiet footsteps that immediately make your inner alarm bell ring. You don't adjudge them, though. Everyone is out at odd hours because life here doesn't follow a schedule, it follows survival. People work late, drink late, eat late, worry late. The whole district feels like it's running 6 hours behind the rest of London, stuck in a perpetual loop of just one more errand before bed. Let's talk about sound. Night brings out the acoustic chaos of old London. A glass clinks somewhere behind you. A dog barks once, then decides it is not worth the effort. Footsteps approach and recede, multiply, or disappear altogether. Every noise seems to come from everywhere at once. And because the fog muffles sound unpredictably, conversations drift through the air like disembodied Victorian podcast episodes you didn't ask to hear. And, of course, there's fear. Quiet, subtle, constant. 1888 isn't just any year. These nighttime streets have all the relaxation potential of a horror movie set. You're not scared exactly, but you're aware. Very aware. Deliciously aware. Hyper-aware. Aware in the same way you are when you check your bank account after a weekend of questionable decisions. Every person you see could be perfectly ordinary, perfectly harmless, or perfectly not. You glance over your shoulder, occasionally not enough to look suspicious, just enough to confirm you still exist. And when someone walks behind you for a few seconds too long, your imagination sprints ahead, drafting possible headlines. Let us talk about the smell. Night doesn't erase the day, it just marinates it. The scent of stale ale, coal smoke, damp wood, questionable fish, and the collective exhaustion of 80,000 people blends together into one bold, confident aroma. You breathe it in and immediately regret it, but it's better than holding your breath until morning. And yet, even with all this, there is something strangely beautiful about Whitechapel after dark. The muffled glow, the soft hum of activity, the way the city breathes like a living creature. You sense the resilience of the people, the determination humming beneath the fog. But beauty aside, you keep walking briskly, because the darkness is thick, the shadows are lively, and absolutely nothing good happens in Whitechapel after midnight. You weave through narrow alleys packed with people, all living on top of each other like a chaotic Victorian Jenga tower. Whitechapel is less a neighbourhood, and more a human avalanche held together by rent, steam, and the persistent feeling that life could be worse but probably will be by tomorrow morning. Everywhere you turn, someone is standing too close to someone else who is standing too close to you, and the concept of personal space is treated with the same level of seriousness Victorians applied to dental hygiene. Optional, rare, and vaguely suspicious. Let S talk about the living situation. Housing here isn't measured in square feet. It is measured in oxygen availability. You pass tenements where entire families share single rooms, and by rooms, we were really talking about 4 walls who met in a dark alley and agreed to lean on each other for structural support. Windows daunty open, doors daunty close, floors groan like they've seen too much which they have. When someone on the upper floor sneezes, people on the lower floor instinctively duck. Inside, the air is thick with heat, smoke from coal stoves, and the lingering aroma of whatever boiled cabbage situation happened 2 days ago and refuses to leave. You can tell whether the walls are sweating or if that's just the natural humidity generated by 27 humans breathing in a space suited for maybe one moderately sized Victorian corgi. Everywhere you turn, there's motion. People shuffle in and out, carrying baskets, laundry, crying toddlers, half-eaten bread, mysterious parcels, and occasionally a chicken who looks like it has a secret. Children run through the hallways like they're in training for a sport that won't be invented for another 100 years. Someone practices singing in the stairwell, someone else practices yelling in response, and because everything is crowded, everything is loud. Conversations layer on top of each other until they form one continuous urban soundtrack. Gossip, arguments, laughter, coughing, the relentless squeak of a pram wheel that died months ago but keeps being dragged around anyway. Above you, neighbours argue about rent. Beside you, a couple fights about who forgot to buy bread. Below you, someone is praying loudly that the ceiling doesn't collapse again. Let's talk about the streets. They're just as crowded, if not more. People spill from doorways, from markets, from pubs, from jobs that ended at sunset, but somehow someone is still working. Vendors shout over each other, offering everything from fresh eels to slightly less fresh eels. Children dart between adults like small, determined bees. Laundry hangs overhead like the neighbourhood's attempt at patchy cloud cover. You're walking in a place where the population density is perpetually one sneeze away from collapse. And it's not just the people, you're also sharing space with animals. Goats, dogs, cats, rats, and at least one pig that seems to be running errands for someone. The rats honestly seem to understand the layout better than you do. You follow one for a moment because it looks like it knows where it's going, but then it makes a sudden turn into a hole in the wall, and you decide that's not a lifestyle you're ready for. Let's talk about smells. Oh, yes. The air is a perfume of coal smoke, damp wood, sweat, stale beer, and the indescribable scent produced when 80,000 people live too close together and none of them have regular access to plumbing. You learn to breathe strategically, timing your inhales the same way athletes time their jumps. Despite the chaos, there's a sense of community. People know each other. They look out for one another. They share news, food scraps, and occasionally unsolicited advice about your posture. In a place where everyone lives overlap like overlapping laundry lines, you learn to adapt, to blend, to listen for the rhythm of the street. But the overcrowding has a darker edge. It means you're never alone, but not in a comforting way. It means if something happens in a dim alley or a cramped courtyard, someone might see it, or they might be too overwhelmed, too tired, too preoccupied to notice at all. It means anonymity thrives, hiding in the cracks between bodies. It means in this bustling swarm of humanity, a man could slip in, slip out, and vanish into the crowd before anyone realized he'd been there. And so you keep moving through the chaos, trying not to bump into too many elbows or inhale too deeply. Because in Whitechapel, survival isn't just about luck, it's about learning to navigate a world where the walls are close, the streets are packed, and danger always finds room to squeeze through. The local police are doing their best, which would be comforting if their best wasn't essentially walking around with lanterns and guesses. You watch a constable shuffle past, his boots worn down to a philosophical level of thinness, swinging a lantern that gives off the illuminating power of a birthday candle at the end of its shift. He squints into the fog like he is waiting for it to apologize. He sighs, adjusts his hat, and continues his patrol with the determined energy of someone who has already accepted that tonight will be terrible, but he has nowhere else to be. Let's talk about Victorian policing. This is CSI, Whitechapel. This is CBL. Could be literally anyone. Crime-solving technology consists of lanterns, mustaches, and hope. Communication between officers is done primarily by walking up to each other, which is challenging when the fog makes it impossible to see another human being unless they're already close enough to borrow your lunch. And these poor men, they are tired. They walk miles every night, patrolling streets that twist randomly like they were designed by a drunk architect in a hurry. They memorize which alleys lead to markets, which alleys lead to taverns, and which alleys lead to someone loudly vomiting after a long evening of Victorian stress management. But in 1888, everything is different. Whitechapel is on edge. Every constable is overworked, underpaid, and quietly panicking. They are carrying more lanterns, more paperwork, and more unsolicited advice from citizens who have zero policing experience but infinite opinions. Let's talk about equipment. You'd think, given the level of fear in the district, the police would have something impressive: whistles, handcuffs, maybe a strong flashlight. Nope. They have wooden truncheons, unreliable lanterns, and tall helmets designed primarily to make them look important from a distance. They occasionally carry notebooks, which are less for solving crimes and more for pretending they are solving crimes. When they investigate a crime scene, they do so by crouching, squinting, and saying something like, troubling, no gloves, no markers, just vibes. Evidence collection is basically stare at it. Forget where you put it. Make a note to ask someone smarter tomorrow. And the training? Let's just say it varies. Some constables have military backgrounds. Others were bakers 3 weeks ago. One man got the job because he was tall and available. Another got it because his cousin knew a supervisor. The unifying theme is earnestness. They are very earnest, very confused, but earnest. Let's talk about how the public interacts with them. Citizens swarm constables with theories. Dozens of theories. Hundreds of theories. I saw a man, they say. Which man? The constable asks. A suspicious one, the citizen replies. They're all suspicious, the constable sighs, and the cycle repeats. Every night becomes a blur of responding to shouts, calming drunks, escorting people home, checking alleys, rechecking alleys, checking alleys because someone else swore they heard something, writing reports about hearing something but finding nothing, then going home to collapse for 5 hours before doing it again. And remember, their beat is massive. Too massive. Whitechapel isn't just one neighbourhood. It is a labyrinth of overcrowded streets filled with desperate, exhausted people. Crime is constant. Fights break out. Thefts occur. Someone accidentally sets something on fire 3 times a week. Yet somehow, they're expected to track the movements of a killer who seems to dissolve into smoke. Let us talk about morale. The constables won't admit they were scared, not out loud, but you can see it in the way they tighten their grip on their lanterns, in the way they pause at intersections listening for footsteps, in the way they walk together more often now, not because it's protocol, but because it is human. But still they patrol, they show up night after night, lanterns flickering, boots echoing in the fog. They try to keep people safe even when the fear pressing against their ribs whispers that safety isn't guaranteed. And in a strange way, their presence, however flawed, matters. Their lanterns, dim as they are, offer a tiny glow of reassurance in a city that feels swallowed by shadow. They're a reminder that someone is out there looking, listening, hoping to make sense of the chaos. Even if their methods are let us call them aspirational. Every morning brings a new newspaper headline, sharper than the coffee you desperately need but can't afford. You wake up to the sound of paper boys shouting like tiny caffeinated heralds of doom. They sprint through Whitechapel's crooked streets, waving the latest edition like they were auctioning off panic itself. Extra! Extra! Read all about it, one yells. Horrific murder in Whitechapel. Another cries. You haven't even rubbed the sleep out of your eyes yet, and already the news is assaulting you like a Victorian alarm clock armed with bad tidings. Let's talk about newspapers, because in 1888, they're not just sources of information. They're the Victorian equivalent of group chats, Twitter threads, conspiracy subreddits, and panic selling on Facebook Marketplace all rolled into one. They don't just report the news, they perform it. Dramatic fonts, over-the-top headlines, illustrations designed to make your breakfast turn sideways. It's a sensationalism sprinkled with anxiety, printed daily. You grab a paper for a penny, an amount that somehow feels both affordable and ruinous. The ink smudges immediately onto your fingers, marking you as someone who's been emotionally compromised by the morning's headlines. The front page screams about another grisly murder. written in a tone that is both horrified and thrilled, like the editor is trying very hard not to say, "We are going to sell so many copies today." And people devour these papers. Whole crowds gather around the newsstands, gulping down paragraphs like they're starving for disaster. You try to read over someone's shoulder, but everyone is pressed so close together you might as well be reading communally. Every reaction spreads like ripples, gasps, whispers, muttered curses, and the occasional dramatic feint, which is immediately milked for attention. Let S talk about accuracy. The newspapers, oh, they try. But facts in 1888 are flexible. One paper swears the killer is tall, another says he's short, another suggests he might be left-handed, foreign, local, deranged, possessed, or possibly wearing a hat that defies the known laws of fashion. By the time you read 3 editions, you've learned nothing except that journalists are having the time of their lives. And because the newspapers are chaotic, so is the gossip. Whitechapel becomes a giant rumour factory. People repeat things they saw in print as though they personally witnessed them. "I read it in the paper" becomes the Victorian version of "I saw it on TikTok," which is to say, almost entirely unreliable. You hear one man insist the killer is a surgeon, another says he's a butcher. A woman swears she heard he's an American. A drunk insists he's a ghost. Somehow, all of these statements coexist. News travels through the district faster than rats through a bakery. Shopkeepers hear it first. They tell customers. Customers tell neighbours. Neighbours tell the woman who sells fish. The fishmonger tells absolutely everyone because she has very strong opinions and a voice that can carry across oceans. By noon, every detail has been repeated, expanded, embellished, and seasoned with personal flair until even the original reporters wouldn't recognize it. Let S talk about the illustrations. Newspapers love a dramatic sketch, even if the artist has never seen the crime scene, the suspects, or the street where anything occurred. Drawings are based on descriptions passed through at least 4 people and 1 man who might have been asleep. Faces look wildly inaccurate. Proportions bend like soft clay, and everything is shadowy, foreboding, and slightly cross-eyed. But readers don't care, they stare at the drawings until they feel brave enough to roll the paper into a makeshift emotional support baton. And here's the kicker. Because news spreads so fast, so loud, and so confusingly, fear becomes a daily routine. People clutch newspapers like talismans, scanning for clues, warnings, anything that might make sense of the chaos. But instead of clarity, each edition just adds another layer of tension to an already anxious city. Still, there's something almost comforting in the communal panic. Everyone reads together, worries together, speculates together. 12 people in line for bread might all be strangers, but for a moment they were united in the collective gasp of, "Did you hear what the paper said this morning?" And as you fold up the paper, careful not to smudge more ink on your clothes, you realize that the news here isn't just information, it's fuel. Fuel for fear, curiosity, conversation, and the constant, overwhelming sense that Whitechapel is spiraling into something nobody fully understands. Inside your tenement, the walls are thin, the floors creak, and the neighbours argue about the same 3 topics every night: money, noise, and how everything smells weird. The moment you step inside, the building announces your arrival with a loud groan part: architecture, part existential crisis. Victorian tenements are less homes and more vertical people storage. Every surface leans slightly in one direction, as though the entire structure has accepted its fate and is slowly reclining into the earth. You climb the narrow staircase, which creaks so loudly it startles you into apologizing. Not to anyone in particular, just to the stair itself, in case it collapses out of spite. Let's talk about the walls. They're thin. So thin you can hear conversations through them with greater clarity than the conversations you participate in yourself. You know your neighbours, routines, arguments, aspirations, fears, and digestive issues. You've never met the woman next door, but you know she disapproves of her brother's fiancé and thinks her landlady is hiding money in the cellar. You know the couple upstairs fights nightly between 11 West and 11:07 p.m., takes a break, then resumes at 11:15 with renewed stamina. The walls don't separate you, they introduce you. The floors are another adventure. The wood beneath your feet shifts like it is actively trying to remember how to be a floor. Some boards dip, some rise, some wobble just enough to make you reconsider your life choices. If you drop something, it rolls off to a mysterious destination known only to the building. You once lost an entire spoon somewhere between the kitchen and the wall, and everyone accepts that you will never retrieve it. Let us talk about the rooms. They are small, very small. It is the kind of space where you can cook, eat, and accidentally eavesdrop on the couple arguing in the hallway without having to move more than 2 steps. Your bed is stuffed with straw, scratchy, squeaky straw that pokes you all night and smells faintly of disappointment. The mattress shifts every time you breathe, which means sleep is technically possible but not recommended. Heating is minimal. Your primary heat source is your body temperature, and unfortunately, your body is doing its best, but it's failing miserably. Occasionally you manage to light a small fire, but the chimney has the efficiency of a damp sock. Smoke fills the room, then politely leaks into the hallway, then makes its way to the neighbours, who complain loudly about someone down there burning something again. Let us talk about sound, because the tenement is alive with it. Babies cry. Pots clang. Someone snores with heroic intensity. Someone else is practicing violin, badly. Boots stomp overhead. Cats knock things over in the stairwell. And every few minutes you hear a chorus of voices shouting the universal Victorian refrain, "Keep it down." Nobody listens. The building is basically a 24/7 audio collage. And the smells? They're a journey. A deep sensory journey. You get hints of boiling cabbage, damp wood, coal smoke, unwashed clothes, mould, and whatever is growing in the stairwell corner that no one wants to investigate. Sometimes you detect the faint aroma of stew drifting under your door, and for a moment you feel comforted until you realise it's coming from the room above you. And somehow the scent has travelled downward, sideways, and spiritually into your soul. Let's talk about privacy. You do not have it. You do not dream of it. Privacy is a concept reserved for the wealthy and people who live in books. Here, if you want alone time, you stand in the corner, face the wall, and hope nobody needs to walk through that exact corner in the next 30 seconds. But amid all the noise, smells, drafts, and cramped chaos, there is something strangely warm about tenement life. People share food when they have it. They watch one another as children. They gossip, laugh, and support each other with an unspoken agreement that everybody is doing their best in circumstances that are objectively terrible. And even though the building creaks ominously when the wind blows, and you are fairly certain the wall by the kitchen is developing a personality, you feel a sense of belonging. This tight, noisy, overcrowded box of humanity may be barely held together by nails and prayer, but it's home. The city's soundtrack is a mix of distant bells, horses clopping, someone hacking up Victorian lung issues, and the unsettling silence right before panic spreads. Whitechapel at night has its own strange rhythm, an orchestra of exhaustion, fear, and everyday survival. You walk down the street listening to the environment the way modern people listen to true crime podcasts, half curious, half terrified, fully aware that things could escalate at any moment. And in 1888, they often do. Let us talk about the bells first. Church bells, clock tower bells, factory shift change bells. Victorian London runs on bells the way modern life runs on notifications. The problem is, every bell sounds vaguely ominous. When one rings, the entire district pauses for a second, like the bells an anxious parent calling everyone home. You hear one echo through the fog, the tone slightly warped by distance, and you instantly wonder whether it's announcing the hour or a new disaster. Then there are the horses. Their hooves clatter like nervous applause on the cobblestones, steady, predictable, familiar. Carriages rattle past with wheels that squeak, groan or screech like mechanical banshees. A horse snorts somewhere behind you, startling you into a small, undignified hop. The fog makes the sounds bounce around unpredictably, so the horse might be beside you or 2 streets over. Part of the fun is never knowing. And yes, people are coughing, always coughing. Victorian lungs are doing their best, but they're in a constant battle against coal smoke, fog, disease, and the emotional trauma of living in Whitechapel. The coughs echo softly at first, then more violently. A man near a tavern hacks so loudly you feel it in your ribcage. Somewhere else, a woman's cough drifts through an open window like an eerie lullaby that tells you to hydrate more often. Let's talk about the taverns. Their sounds spill into the street. Drunken laughter, slurred singing, the occasional argument that sounds serious until someone says something ridiculous and the entire brawl dissolves into giggles. Glasses clink, chairs scrape. Someone belts out a sea shanty in a key that has never existed before. But outside the pubs where the streets narrow and the fog thickens, the sounds get stranger. Quiet footsteps. Quick footsteps. Footsteps that stop abruptly. A faint whisper you can quite place. The rustle of fabric brushing past brick. The sudden, sharp gasp of someone who just realised they're lost, late, or both. And then there's the silence. Not peaceful silence, charged silence. The kind of silence that stretches thin across the street like a tripwire. You could walk 5 paces in total noise, the clanging of carts, the muttering of passers-by, and suddenly sink into a patch of pure stillness, where even the fog seems to hold its breath. These pockets of quiet are the ones that make your nerves hum. Something about them feels wrong in a way you can articulate, like the city is warning you without words. Let us talk about the shouting. Victorian shouting has range. Sometimes it is cheerful street vendors calling attention to their goods with the confidence of people who believe everyone desperately wants an eel right now. Sometimes it's frustrated neighbours arguing over money, noise, or who left a mysterious stain on the shared staircase. And sometimes it is panicked sharp, sudden, cutting through the fog like a knife. When someone screams in Whitechapel, the sound spreads fast. Doors open, heads turn, people stop walking, conversations fade. The scream echoes once, twice, swallowed by the maze of alleys. For a moment, the entire district goes quiet, 10,000 people, all listening at once, bracing for what might come next. And then the city resumes its noise, because life here can stop for long. People return to their errands, their conversations, their routines. The moment passes, leaving behind only a whisper of tension in the air. Let's talk about the markets. Even at night, some stalls stay open. Vendors call out soft sales pitches. Meat hooks clank. Someone drops a basket of potatoes, and the sound echoes down the street like a very gentle avalanche. Children laugh in the distance, sharp, bright bursts of sound that feel out of place but comforting. All these noises, bells, hooves, coughing, laughter, singing, shouting, silence they layer on top of each other until they create the unique hum of a district bracing for danger but still stubbornly alive. You feel it under your feet, vibrating through the cobblestones. It's the pulse of a city on guard, a place that refuses to go quiet even when fear curls in every shadow. And as you keep walking, listening to the strange symphony of Victorian Whitechapel, you realise the truth. This city doesn't need to see danger to sense it. It hears it. Your clothes are heavy, itchy, and slightly damp, always damp. There is no moment in Whitechapel where your outfit isn't clinging to you like a needy Victorian ghost. The air seeps into every fibre of your clothing until the fabric develops its own personality, cold, clingy, and vaguely resentful. You pluck at your collar, but it doesn't help. Your shirt has already fused emotionally to your skin and is refusing separation on principle. Let's talk about layers, because Victorian layering isn't a fashion. It is survival. You start with a shirt made of rough cotton or coarse wool, depending on how much money you absolutely do not have. The wool one feels like hugging a sheep who dislikes you. The cotton one manages to be both thin and somehow suffocating. You tuck it into trousers that sag in defeat, held up by suspenders whose elasticity died before you were born. Your trousers are thick and stiff, smelling faintly of damp earth, coal smoke, and your own fear. You don't wash them so much as negotiate with them. Washing is expensive, drying takes ages, and every attempt leaves you with trousers that feel colder afterward than before. Soap is also a luxury, and honestly, your clothes wouldn't know what to do with it. Over your shirt, you wear a waistcoat, snug, scratchy, and patched in at least 4 places. It provides exactly as much warmth as a stern motivational speech. The buttons never match, but they were hanging in there with admirable optimism. Then comes the coat. The coat is your armour, long, heavy, and permanently moist. It absorbs weather the way a sponge absorbs water, except it never dries. Ever. It smells like the last 3 seasons compressed into fabric form. When you move, it swishes dramatically, which would be cool if you weren't also freezing. Let S talk about the scarf. Your scarf is the closest thing you have to emotional support. You wrap it around your neck, then around again, then tuck the frayed ends into your coat until you look like you're slowly being devoured by wool. It smells vaguely like boiled turnips and smoke, because everything smells vaguely like boiled turnips and smoke. Your boots? Hard leather, cracked at the toes, stiff at the ankles, and perpetually damp from fog, puddles, or questionable street fluids. Every step you take sounds like 2 bricks politely arguing. Inside the boots, your socks rebel. They slide, twist, bunch, and attempt escape. Your feet are either freezing, sweating, or both, which seems physically impossible, but Victorian footwear enjoys defying physics. Let S talk about hats. Everyone in Whitechapel wears a hat. Not for fashion, but because your skull would freeze without it. Yours is a flat cap or a bowler, depending on your occupation, or whether you found something abandoned on a stairwell. The hat never fits right. It is always slightly too tight or too loose, and it becomes damp within 2 minutes of stepping outside, collapsing over your eyebrows like it has given up on life. And the gloves? If you have gloves, they are fingerless, frayed, and more symbolic than functional. They provide the warmth of a mild thought. Every time you blow on your hands, the wind steals your breath and laughs in your face. Let S talk about laundry specifically, why you avoid it. Washing clothes in Victorian London is a workout, a negotiation, and a sacrifice. You need water, cold, soap, expensive, space, non-existent, and time. What S that? Drying clothes is even worse. They hang limply on lines, dripping their problems onto the ground. By the time they are dry, they are still damp because the air refuses to cooperate. But here's the thing. Despite the discomfort, the itchiness, the heaviness, and the constantly moist misery, your clothes do their job. They keep you from becoming a human ice sculpture. They protect you from the cold winds, the drizzle, the fog that is both weather and personality trait. They shield you from the city's grime and smell some of them at least. And when you walk through Whitechapel, coat flapping, scarf swallowing your chin, boots clumping with tired determination, you look exactly like everyone else. Bundled, braced, bracing for more. Your clothes aren't just garments, they're a battle gear. And tonight the cold is only one of the enemies outside. You turn a corner and instantly regret it. The alley ahead of you is narrow enough that you start reconsidering every life decision that led you to this moment. The fog thickens, the air chills, and your instincts whisper, "Nope," but it is Whitechapel, and shortcuts are sometimes the difference between getting home before midnight and getting home cold, irritated, and aggressively hungry. So you step forward anyway, with all the confidence of a person pretending they are not terrified. Let us talk about the alleys. These aren't cute European alleys you see on postcards. These are Victorian problem corridors, crooked, cramped, and constructed by someone who hated straight lines and personal safety. Some alleys narrow so dramatically you feel like you're being hugged by the architecture in a way that is neither friendly nor consensual. Others twist abruptly, concealing their destination like they were trying out for a role in a mystery novel. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, slick, and deeply untrustworthy. Cobblestones wobble. Puddles hide beneath the fog like miniature traps. You take a step and immediately wonder whether the puddle you just dipped into was water, sewage, or something unspeakably Victorian. The smell does not help you solve the mystery, and honestly, you don't want to know the answer. Let S talk about lighting. The alleys have gas lamps technically. Practically, they provide the same illumination as a shy lightning bug. You stand under one, hoping for clarity, but instead the light flickers dramatically like it knows it is starring in a Victorian thriller. The shadows stretch unnaturally across the walls, slanting in angles that feel like optical illusions. You blink, but the shadows blink back. Or maybe that's just your nerves. And then there's the sound. The sound. Alleys amplify noises in strange ways. You hear faint footsteps behind you, but when you turn, no one is there. A bottle clatters somewhere in the distance. A cat yowls from a rooftop. A door slams. Or maybe it creaks. Or maybe the fog itself is making noises again. Honestly, the fog seems sentient at this point, and should probably be paying rent. You keep walking, trying to appear calm. The trick is to walk like you know exactly where you are going, even though you absolutely do not. Victorians do this all the time. It is called confidence, which is historically 70 pretending. Let's talk about who else might be in these alleys. Whitechapel is full of people working late, drinking late, or existing late because they don't have a choice. A figure might emerge from the fog, a woman heading home, a labourer finishing a night shift, a watchman making his rounds, a stranger walking softly, too softly. You step aside politely, your heart racing. They pass without speaking, their footsteps fade, and your imagination takes off at a sprint. This is the reality of 1888. Every alley feels like a coin flip between inconvenience and danger. People walk faster now. They travel in pairs when they can. They avoid certain corners altogether, and they always keep their ears open. Let us talk about the psychology of turning corners here. Every time you twist into a new alley, you hesitate for just a fraction of a second. Is someone there? Are you being watched? Is that shadow just a coat on a hook? Is that shape just a stack of crates? Why does the stack of crates look like it has shoulders? Why are you doing this to yourself? You pick up your pace. The alley opens slightly, giving you a glimpse of the street ahead, a comforting rectangle of dim light. Relief floods through you. You can hear distant chatter, the clop of a horse, the usual chaos, civilization. You're almost out. But then you pass a doorway, a narrow gap between buildings, a place where the fog pulls thicker, deeper like a pocket of darkness too dense to look into. You don't linger. Nobody lingers. Everyone in Whitechapel has learned that staring into dark corners is how horror stories begin. You keep moving. Faster. Let's talk about why these alleys matter. Because this twisting maze of shadows is exactly how a man could disappear without being seen. It's how footsteps could fade in seconds. How a silhouette could slip away. How someone could walk behind you one moment and be gone the next. The geography of Whitechapel didn't just allow mystery, it created it. When you finally step out of the alley and back into the wider street, you feel your shoulders drop by an inch. You breathe deeper. The air isn't safer, but it's less tense. You did it. You survived another shortcut, and you tell yourself firmly that next time you'll take the long way home, you won tea, you'll forget. You'll turn the corner again, and you'll regret it again. Every lamp flickers like it is afraid of commitment. You stand under a gas lamp hoping for illumination, only to discover you've wandered into the Victorian equivalent of mood lighting. It glows just brightly enough to give you the false impression that you can see, and then immediately dims, as though the lamp itself has lost confidence. The flame wobbles inside the glass like it is contemplating quitting its job and moving to the countryside. Let's talk about the gas lamps of Whitechapel. Delicate, dramatic, and deeply unreliable. They're mounted on tall iron posts that look sturdy, but the light they offer is about as helpful as a polite suggestion. When you approach them, the flame inside seems to shrink back shyly, as if you've startled it. These lamps are less streetlights and more decorative gestures towards safety. The glow they cast is small, tiny, really. Each lamp illuminates a circle of street that's barely big enough to stand in. If you take one step to the left or right, you vanish into darkness like a sorrowful Victorian magician. The lamp's job is clearly not to light the street. It is to remind you that lighting exists as a concept. Let's talk about how these lamps behave in the fog. The light doesn't cut through the fog, it gets eaten by it, completely swallowed. The lamp glows bravely for half a second, then the fog rolls around it like a jealous blanket and smothers the poor thing. You watch the halo shrink until it's the size of your hand, trembling as though the weather itself is gaslighting the gaslight. Standing below one is an emotional experience. The glow hits your face, revealing every pore you didn't know you had. But the rest of your surroundings remain a mysterious blur. You're lit like a dramatic Victorian portrait, which is useless for navigation but fantastic for existential dread. Let us talk about maintenance. Gas lamps require lamplighters, actual humans who walk around with ladders and little flame sticks to ignite, adjust, and occasionally scold the lamps. These men trudge through Whitechapel with an air of resigned determination, lighting one lamp after another in a routine that seems never-ending. Because it is. The lamps constantly sputter out, misbehave, or decide tonight is not their night. You pass a lamplighter struggling with a stubborn lamp. He pokes it, shakes it, mutters to it, relights it, steps back proudly, and the flame immediately flickers into near-nothingness again. He sighs with the weariness of a man who has fought too many battles with inanimate objects. You give him a sympathetic nod. He's not fixing the lamp. He's negotiating with it. Let's talk about visibility, or rather the lack thereof. A gas lamp doesn't show you what's ahead. It shows you what's directly in front of you, and only if you lean in close enough to risk singeing your eyebrows. People walking at night drift from one small, trembling circle of light to the next, like moths migrating through existential uncertainty. Between lamps, you're on your own. Darkness swallows you instantly. Your eyes adjust, but to what? Everything looks like a shape. Every shape looks like a person. Every person looks like a shadow. And every shadow looks like it's judging your posture. Let us talk about shadows, because gas lamps create some of the most chaotic silhouettes in human history. A tiny flame thrown against brick walls at odd angles transforms normal objects into looming figures. A laundry line looks like a man stretching ominously. A cat becomes a panther. A stack of crates takes on the shape of someone crouching. Your own shadow behaves like it, auditioning for a horror play, elongating and twisting until you look 10 feet tall with extremely long arms. And this is precisely how fear works in Whitechapel. The lamps show just enough to make you wonder, just enough to make you doubt, just enough to make every alley look like a potential crime scene, and every passerby look like they could be hiding something. Let's talk about sound again, because under a gas lamp you hear things you can see. Footsteps approach from darkness, slow, steady, too soft. Cloth rustles. A far-off door creaks. Someone exhales behind you, or maybe that was just the fog shifting. You glance over your shoulder, but the lamp reveals nothing except your own uneasy expression. And suddenly you understand why people are frightened. The lamps don't fail to show the world, they show just enough of it to let your imagination handle the rest. Still, you continue walking from dim circle to dim circle, grateful for what little light you get. Because in a place like Whitechapel, even the world's weakest flashlight is better than none at all. You pass costermongers, dock workers, exhausted mothers, suspiciously cheerful drunks, and the occasional figure who walks too quietly for comfort. Whitechapel-esque streets might be dim and unsettling, but they're never empty. At any hour, morning, midnight, or some ambiguous Victorian in-between, you'll find an entire cast of characters drifting through the fog like extras in a historical drama you didn't audition for. And every one of them has a story, even if that story is, "I am very tired and would like to go home without slipping on a cabbage leaf again." Let us start with the costermongers. These are the street vendors who seem to have been born shouting. You hear them before you see them, voices slicing through the fog with enthusiastic sales pitches about apples, oysters, fish, old clothes, and occasionally something so ambiguous you simply nod and keep walking. Their carts are overloaded with produce stacked in a way that defies engineering. Somehow nothing ever falls, even though the wheels are wobbling like they want to file for retirement. Dock workers are everywhere, too big, broad-shouldered men trudging home after impossible shifts by the river. They walk with a heavy, lumbering rhythm like their bones have absorbed the weight of every crate they've ever lifted. Their conversations are low and gravelly, blending into the hum of the street. These men are exhausted in a way that makes your own exhaustion feel like a polite suggestion. Let's talk about the mothers. Victorian motherhood is not a hobby, it is a full-contact sport. You see women carrying multiple bags, a baby, a toddler, and the lingering sense that they forgot something important. Their faces are lined with worry, focus, and the sharp determination of someone who will absolutely not tolerate nonsense today. They navigate the uneven cobblestones with agility that would shame most athletes. You step out of their way because you respect both their skill and their potential fury. Then there are the drunks. The drunks. Some are jovial, wobbling through the streets with the carefree joy of a man who has lost count of the number of pints he had. They sing, they sway. They greet strangers like long-lost friends. Then there are the irritated drunks, who mutter at invisible enemies and seem to be arguing with the general concept of life. And finally, there are the mysterious drunks who sit silently in corners, as though communing with the fog about deep existential questions. And in between all these familiar types, you encounter the strange ones, the quiet ones, the ones who walk just a bit too lightly, as though their shoes never fully touch the ground. They appear suddenly beside you, their steps muffled, their presence subtle. By the time you turn to glance, they're already several paces ahead, dissolving into the mist. You tell yourself they're just night workers heading home, but a small, uneasy part of you wonders. Let us talk about the workers who roam the streets at strange hours. Milkmaids finishing early deliveries, butchers all stained in the kind of red that makes you do a double take, chimney sweeps carrying soot in every pore of their skin, match girls hurrying with boxes tucked under their shawls. Every one of them brings a different smell, rhythm and energy to the street, a reminder that in Whitechapel, the work never stops. You pass constables, two men trying very hard to look authoritative while clutching lanterns that flicker like uncertain fireflies. They nod at you with the tired confidence of someone pretending things are under control, even though nobody believes that. Let's talk about the strangers you avoid making eye contact with, the men lingering under awnings, their hats pulled low, the women who watch the street quietly with knowing eyes, the solitary figure who stands motionless until you are almost beside him, then turns and walks away without a sound. And then there are the talkers, people who love to chat with anyone who'll listen. They grab your sleeve, lean in too close, and whisper the latest gossip about murders, suspects, sightings, and shadows that didn't behave like shadows should. They thrive on fear the way children thrive on sweets, and you can help but get pulled into their vortex for a moment. But amid all the chaos, you see warmth too. Friends sharing bread, a father carrying a sleepy child on his shoulders, a couple laughing as they race each other through the fog, community even in the gloom, humanity even in the fear. Because Whitechapel isn't just a place of danger, it's a place of people. Crowded, flawed, exhausted, hopeful people doing their best to get through another day, or another night. Night workers shuffle around like Victorian zombies, delivery boys, watchmen, and women who knew more about danger than the police ever did. They move through the streets with a kind of weary determination that tells you instantly, these are people who have made peace with exhaustion, not conquered it, not overcome it, just accepted it like an unpleasant roommate who snores and never pays rent. In Whitechapel, night work isn't a choice. It's what happens when the day refuses to give you enough hours to survive. Let us start with the delivery boys. These kids, some barely teenagers, dart through the fog carrying parcels, bread, coal, and occasionally things you'd rather not ask about. Their boots slap against the cobblestones in frantic, echoing beats. They're quick because they have to be. The bosses want everything delivered yesterday. Their coats are too big, their caps always slipping over their eyes, and their breath comes out in huffs of white steam that disappear into the fog before anyone notices how cold they are. They weave around drunks and dodge horses with the reflexes of creatures who've spent their entire lives avoiding disaster. If modern children learned road safety from these Victorian boys, traffic accidents would drop to zero. But emotional trauma would skyrocket. Then there are the watchmen, a fascinating group of men who walk their beats with lanterns, long coats, and the expression of someone who has been awake for 48 hours and has accepted that reality is a suggestion. They are paid to observe the streets, report disturbances, and generally exist as a deterrent. But those lanterns don't illuminate much, and neither do their half-closed eyes. Watchmen march slowly, tapping their truncheons against metal posts at regular intervals, creating a rhythmic clang that echoes down the street. It is their version of saying, still alive, still out here. Please let this shift end. Their voices drift into the night in low mutters, tiny self-pep talks, or the occasional complaint about the cold. They're not afraid exactly, but they're acutely aware that they are outnumbered by the dark. Let's talk about the women working at night, the ones Victorian society liked to judge loudly but relied on quietly. These women know the streets intimately. They can read danger before it materializes. They know which corners are safe, which alleys are cursed, and which men walk too softly, their shawls wrapped tightly against the cold, and their eyes flick to every shadow with practiced precision. They're not scared. Not anymore. Fear has been replaced by vigilance, a survival instinct honed sharper than any police training. Many know the city far better than the constables do. They can sense trouble episodes before they happen, and they stay away from places where the fog seems to gather wrong. They warn each other, signal each other, protect each other when the night feels especially off. And then there are the bakers and factory workers, whose shifts run so early or so late they blur into the dead of night. Bakers begin their labour before dawn, pounding dough in warm, glowing kitchens that feel almost heavenly compared to the freezing streets outside. Their soot-dusted neighbours emerge from the match and rope factories at hours that would make modern workers write strongly worded emails. You see these night workers trudging home with tired eyes and shoulders slumped. Their feet drag, their breaths fog the air. They don't walk, they endure. A man might carry a toolbox, a woman might carry a basket, a child might carry absolutely nothing except exhaustion. Let us talk about the smells that trail them. Flour, wood smoke, damp wool, fish scales, metal dust, sweat, and the lingering scent of whatever the city cooked that day. You can identify someone's job by scent alone. That's how close everyone lives. That's how much the night absorbs. And amid all this, you realise something unsettling. These are the people who see everything. They're awake during the hours when most residents hide indoors. They know which shadows belong to neighbours and which don tea. They catch glimpses of figures the rest of the city only hears about. But they also know the unspoken rule: mind your business, keep your head down, and don't linger in the dark. Night workers are the pulse of Whitechapel. Exhausted, brave, and endlessly observant, they keep the city running, even if the city barely notices the toll it takes on them. Everyone has a theory. Everyone has a friend of a friend who saw something. In Whitechapel, rumours spread faster than colds, and significantly faster than facts. By the time you step into the nearest tavern or market stall, you've already heard at least 4 contradictory theories about who the killer is, and all 4 are delivered with the unshakable confidence of someone who absolutely does not know what they were talking about. Let's talk about suspects, because in 1888, every man with a hat becomes a person of interest, and every man without a hat becomes even more suspicious. People are desperate for answers, and desperation is nature's most enthusiastic rumour fertilizer. Suddenly the streets are filled with amateur detectives whose qualifications include owning eyes, reading newspapers, and having too much free time between shifts. You overhear one woman insist, "My cousin says the killer is tall." A man beside her counters, "No, no, no. Short, very short." Another gentleman declares confidently, "Foreign." Someone immediately argues, "Local, definitely local." By the end of the conversation, you have a suspect who is simultaneously tall, short, foreign, local, thin, stocky, old, young, polite, rude, and maybe left-handed. Let us talk about how these rumours start. The newspapers feed the frenzy with every new edition. Sketches appear that look nothing like each other. Witnesses give descriptions so vague they might be describing a ghost or a coat on a hanger, or perhaps an unusually tall pigeon. One paper insists the killer has a moustache. Another says clean-shaven. A third suggests he might have sideburns described as ambitious. People cling to whatever version makes the most sense to them personally, then go around repeating it as gospel truth. The butcher down the street? Very suspicious. Carries knives. The doctor on Hanbury Street? Always awake at odd hours. The barber? Too quiet. The baker? Too cheerful. You begin to realise that in a district this tense, simply existing becomes suspicious. Let's talk about the strangers, the men who drift through the neighbourhood speaking little, watching much, leaving even less behind. Any time someone new appears on your street, people whisper behind hands. One woman claims she saw a gentleman in a fine coat lurking near the market. Another claims she saw a sailor with shifty eyes by the pub. A third swears she noticed a man carrying a mysterious bag, although she admits the bag might have simply been full of laundry and personal despair. Then there are the favourite suspects, the people the entire community collectively decides must be suspicious because their vibes are off. There is the man with the limp who mutters to himself. There's the overly polite gentleman who always tips his hat. There's the butcher whose apron is always stained because he's a butcher. There's the cobbler who works late into the night. All innocent, all guilty looking. Let's talk about the tavern conversations because that's where theories get cooked to perfection. You sit at a table while the man beside you slams his ale down and announces, "It must be a surgeon." Another replies, "Nonsense, only a sailor could disappear that quickly." A third jumps in, no, it is someone wealthy, they always get away with everything. Meanwhile, a fourth voice from across the room suggests it is the lamplighter. And then someone else blames the weather, which, honestly, is the most reasonable theory so far. People love patterns. They squint at shadows, rearrange details, and mold reality until it fits their preferred story. It is comforting, predictable, less terrifying than admitting that the killer might simply be a normal man blending into the mass of humanity around you. Let's talk about the way suspicion settles on the city like dust. You start noticing things you wouldn't have noticed before. Footsteps behind you, men lingering too long under lamps, someone walking too close, someone walking too fast, someone walking too quietly. You begin studying faces, trying to remember details you hope you'll never need. And yet you know deep down that the perfect suspect doesn't exist, because in Whitechapel, the fear isn't just about who the killer is. It is about who he could be. Anyone. Everyone. The myth of the perfect suspect isn't about finding the truth. It's about coping with the fact that the truth might be hiding behind an ordinary face. And so the theories continue, growing wilder each day, passed from neighbour to neighbour like hand-me-down sweaters. None of them solve anything, but they give people something to hold on to in a city where the shadows keep their own secrets. The fog isn't just weather, it is camouflage. People vanish into it faster than your motivation on a Monday morning. London fog has a personality moody, dramatic, clingy, and in Whitechapel. It works overtime. It rolls through the streets like a massive, damp conspiracy, wrapping itself around every corner, every doorway, every unfortunate human who dares step outside after sunset. You can almost hear it whisper, "Good luck seeing anything tonight." Let's talk about visibility or the lack thereof. When the fog settles in, you can barely see your own feet. The street lamps glow like someone lit a candle inside a bowl of milk. Buildings turn into blurry grey shapes. People turn into silhouettes. Silhouettes turn into vague blobs. And vague blobs? They turn into pure terror when you're walking home alone. You take one step forward and feel the world shrink around you. The fog closes in like a cold, damp hug from a relative you didn't agree to see. Your breath makes tiny white clouds that fade instantly swallowed up before you can even appreciate them. You start relying on sound, but the fog muffles that too, softening footsteps, swallowing voices and twisting echoes until everything sounds like it. It's coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Let's talk about shadows. Fog shouldn't produce shadows, but somehow Victorian fog does. It creates strange half-shapes, long streaks of darkness that slide along brick walls and dart between alleys. The shadows seem alive, not quite matching the movements of the people who cast them. You find yourself staring far too long at a shape ahead of you, only to realize it's a laundry line trying its best to be spooky. Then, a few steps later, a shape you thought was laundry starts moving. This is why fear grows quickly here. Because when you can trust your eyes, your imagination fills in the blanks, and those blanks never contain comforting things. Let's talk about movement. In this fog, people don't walk, they appear and vanish. One moment someone is behind you, footsteps steady. The next moment, silence. Maybe they turned down a side street. Maybe they stopped. Or maybe the fog simply swallowed them whole. You turn, but you can see more than an arm's length behind you. The world ends right at your elbow, and here's where the danger creeps in. In this kind of environment, one person who knows the streets intimately, who knows the blind spots, the shortcuts, the places where lamplight fails, has an enormous advantage. Someone who walks softly could blend in with the fog until they became part of it. Someone who knows which alley bends to the right and which courtyard has two exits could disappear in seconds. Let us talk about how people behave in fog like this. They walk faster, they hunch into themselves, they stay close to walls, whispering apologies when they bump into strangers who materialize out of thin air. Sometimes you see figures dart through cross streets, moving with purpose you can't place. Other times you hear footsteps behind you, only to turn and find nothing. And the fog changes constantly. It thickens, thins, swirls and reforms like it is practicing choreography. One moment you can see a few yards ahead. The next, everything dissolves into grey soup. You stand perfectly still, but the fog moves around you, shifting, breathing, sliding across the street in slow waves. It is hard not to feel like the city itself is watching. Let's talk about fear. When the fog is thickest, every sound becomes loaded with meaning. Footstep, a cough, a whispered conversation, the faint click of a boot heel. You freeze, listening, trying to decide if the noise is harmless or a warning. The problem is, in this weather, you never know, and uncertainty breeds terror faster than any headline ever could. It's not just that someone could hide in the fog, it is that the fog hides for them. It's a silent accomplice, smothering light, bending sound, masking movement. A cloak drawn across an entire district, a shroud, a curtain, a trap. And that's why people were afraid. Not just because a killer walked the streets, but because the streets themselves gave him cover. Because in Whitechapel, the fog didn't just roll in from the river, it rolled in with secrets. You tell yourself you're fine. Then the street curves wrong. Whitechapel has a special talent. It can make you lost in a place you've walked through every day of your life. You turn one corner, just one, and suddenly you're in a street that feels like it has been rearranged by mischievous Victorian goblins. The fog thickens, the lamps dim, and your confidence evaporates with the speed of steam escaping a kettle. Let's talk about how quickly things go sideways. One moment you're walking down a familiar road, humming quietly to yourself. Then you notice a shop sign you don't recognize. You tell yourself, maybe I've just never looked up before. Then the building next to it also looks unfamiliar. You walk another 20 paces and realize you have absolutely no idea where you are, how you got here, or whether the street even existed yesterday. Victorian streets were not built logically. They were built emotionally, which is to say chaotically. They twist, bend, burge, branch, narrow, widen, disguise themselves, and then suddenly dead end into brick walls like a cosmic prank. Maps try their best, but even they get confused and give up halfway through drawing the alleyways. Let's talk about your internal compass. In theory, it should guide you. In practice, it panics. Your brain becomes a Victorian office clerk flipping through filing cabinets labelled left and right. And dear God, where am I? You turn a corner thinking you're headed north, only to emerge somewhere that feels like the geographical equivalent of a shrug. The fog doesn't help. It distorts distance. A building that looks 10 feet away turns out to be right in front of you, startling you so badly you consider apologizing to it. The sound of footsteps echoes from somewhere behind you, or perhaps in front of you. The dizziness of uncertainty makes your stomach flip. You take a few more steps and wonder if you was walking in circles. The terrifying part. You probably are. Whitechapel can loop you without your permission. Let us talk about the signs, because Victorian street signage is a cruel joke. Some streets have names. Some used to have names. Some have names, but they were written in paint so faded it looks like a ghost attempted cursive. You squint. You tilt your head. You step closer. Still nothing. The sign reads, essentially, good luck. You might consider asking someone for directions, but the only people around are shadows moving through the fog at suspicious speeds. Not ideal. And even if you did ask, the directions you get would be something like, go past the Baker S, unless he is closed, then turn by the lamppost that leans left unless it was fixed. Then follow the road till you see the place where old Tom fell in the mud. Not helpful. Let us talk about how panic creeps in. It starts small, a breath that catches slightly. A little tightness in your chest. A quiet voice whispering, This is fine. You speed up for no reason. You look over your shoulder more often than necessary. You strain your ears for familiar noises. You promise yourself you won't start running unless something really bad happens. Then the street curves in a way you swear it didn't curve before. The fog thickens, the lamps dim, and suddenly the buildings around you feel taller, closer, heavier, like the city is exhaling onto your neck. Your mind races. Did the killer walk this street? Am I going the wrong way? How many wrong ways are there? Am I even on a street, or have I wandered into someone else's front yard? Why does that shadow look like it's leaning? Why am I like this? Let us talk about the moment you finally spot something familiar. A storefront, a sound, a corner you recognize. Light hits your eyes differently, and the street opens instead of closing. Relief floods you like warm tea. Your knees wobble. You laugh quietly at yourself because you weren't actually in danger, just disoriented, cold, and catastrophizing like a professional. But the fear was real, because in Whitechapel, getting lost doesn't just mean taking a wrong turn. It means slipping into places where the fog hides truths and the shadows misunderstand boundaries. Places where danger has more room to breathe. Where you could wander alone unseen by anyone except whoever might already be watching. Still, you step back onto the familiar road, straighten your hat, and tell yourself that next time you'll stay on the main street. You want tea? But it's cute that you think that. Stepping into a tavern feels like defrosting. The warmth hits you first, a heavy, steamy, comforting blast of heat that smells like beer, stew, sweat, wood smoke, and the faint tang of spilled hope. Your fingers immediately stop feeling like frozen twigs. Your shoulders drop a little. Your soul, previously clenched like a Victorian fist around a penny, begins to relax. Taverns in Whitechapel may be noisy, crowded and questionably sanitary, but they are safe. Or at least safer than the streets outside. Let's talk about the atmosphere. Taverns aren't just pubs, they are community centres, gossip hubs, personal therapy offices, and rumour factories. The moment you walk through the door, your senses are overwhelmed. The room glows with lamplight and fireplace embers. Tables are crowded with men and women hunched over tankards. Someone in the corner is loudly describing something that absolutely did not happen, but is being received with enthusiastic nods anyway. You find a seat, one that wobbles slightly, because of course it does, and take in the soundscape. The tavern hums with conversation. Words spill over each other like a stream you can just dam. Someone laughs too loudly. Another slams their mug on the table. Two men argue over whether the killer is a foreigner, a doctor, or possibly a demon. Or, in one bold hypothesis, a demon doctor. Let us talk about the bartender. Every tavern has one, the unflappable figure who has seen everything, heard everything, and silently judged everything. They wipe glasses with a cloth that was older than the building. They pour drinks without looking. They break up arguments with a single raised eyebrow. Their voice is low, steady, and gravelly from years of breathing in tobacco smoke and dealing with customers who think shouting is a communication strategy. You order something warm ale, tea, or stew and instantly question your life choices. The ale is lukewarm. The tea is somehow both weak and bitter. The stew is delicious, but you choose not to ask what S in it. Sometimes the mystery is the seasoning. Now let us talk about the whispers. Taverns collect whispers the way libraries collect books. You hear them everywhere. Quiet voices murmuring theories, fears, suspicions. A woman whispers that she saw a man following her. A dock worker swears he heard footsteps behind him that stopped the moment he turned around. A lamplighter insists he saw a shadow move against the light instead of with it. A man with a glass eye claims his eye rolled in its socket all by itself when danger was nearby. Nobody believes him, but everyone leans in anyway. Fear travels in these whispers. So does imagination. so does misinformation. But the tavern is where people feel safe enough to talk about what scares them. The walls creak, the fire pops, the glasses clink, and between those sounds, secrets float. Let S talk about the people inside. There is always a loud drunk enthusiastically reenacting something he did not witness. There is always a couple flirting awkwardly in the corner. There is always an old man telling stories that begin with "back in my day" and end with something no one can verify. There are workers who sit quietly alone, staring into their drinks like they were reading their future in the foam. But the most fascinating people, the ones who sit in the back booths, hooded, silent, watching. These are the observers, the people who come to listen, not speak. Their eyes track everyone who enters, then return to the fire. You don't know if they're bored or gathering information. You don't want to know. And then, of course, there is that moment every night when someone leans too close to you, breath hot with ale, and whispers, "I heard they almost caught him." Everyone stops, even if only for a second. Heads tilt, conversations falter, the tavern holds its breath. Then the person continues, usually with a story that collapses under its own weight within 2 sentences. Let us talk about safety. Taverns feel safe not because danger cannot enter, but because you are surrounded by people. Noise drowns out fear, laughter softens the edges, the warmth soothes your nerves, and the knowledge that everyone else is afraid too, somehow that helps. Community fear is easier to bear than solitary fear. Eventually you finish your drink, savor one last blast of warmth, and step back into the freezing night. The door closes behind you with a heavy thud. The silence hits instantly. The fog waits patiently. The streets stretch out in long, dark ribbons, and you realize just how comforting the tavern truly was. Ink-stained headlines scream at you from every newsstand. You don't just see the newspapers, you feel them. Their bold, frantic letters practically leap off the page, grabbing you by the collar and whispering, "Panic. Do it now." Ink smears on your fingertips before you even touch them, like the terror is contagious through osmosis. Victorian newspapers are dramatic on a normal day, but during these murders, they operate at a level of theatrics that would make modern clickbait blush. Let us talk about their placement. Newspapers hang from wooden stands, are pinned to walls, stacked on crates, and stuffed under the arms of men shouting latest news, more dreadful, more details revealed. The vendors call out headlines with tones better suited for announcing plagues, comets, or the end of civilization. Their voices ring through the streets with perfect salesman panic, ensuring no one within earshot remains calm. The headlines are unbelievable, literally. One paper declares the killer is a surgeon, another insists he's a butcher, a third proclaims with absolute certainty that he is clearly a foreigner, possibly disguised as a local. Every morning the story evolves. The facts? Those are optional. But the fear? That's mandatory. Let's talk about the illustrations. Victorian newspapers adore dramatic sketches. They don't just depict events, they interpret them with artistic flair. A crime scene becomes a swirling vortex of shadows. Witnesses appear dramatically posed, pointing with elongated arms like they're in a Shakespeare play. The killer is drawn as a looming silhouette with a top hat, a coat that billows for no reason, and a general aura of mysterious villain energy. These sketches aren't accurate, but they are effective. People study them carefully, nodding with grave concern while muttering, "Yes, yes, this looks exactly like him," despite the fact that the drawing resembles roughly 40 of London's male population. Let's talk about the articles themselves. They're half fact, half speculation, half hysteria, which is too many halves. But Victorian journalism operates on vibes, not math. Writers compose paragraphs loaded with dramatic, pause-worthy sentences. The fiend slips through our streets unseen. No woman is safe after dusk. Some claim he is not a man at all. You finish reading and feel like you've just consumed a literary thunderstorm. But the real magic happens when people start sharing what they've read. Newspapers are expensive, so one paper might pass through 10 hands, gaining new interpretations each time. You stand beside a group discussing an article, and within minutes the story morphs into something unrecognizable. A rumour born at sunrise becomes a community-wide panic by sunset. Let us talk about misinformation. Every edition brings new clues that turn out to be nothing. Witness statements contradict earlier witness statements. Evidence gets debunked within hours. Newspapers publish letters from anonymous readers claiming to know the killer personally, or claiming to be the killer, or claiming the killer is actually several men in a trench coat working as a team. You never know what to believe, but you believe all of it anyway because the papers make it sound urgent. Children run around shouting headlines like they're playing tag with terror. Adults clutch papers in shaking hands. Neighbours gather on stoops to read snippets aloud in grim, theatrical tones. Even the illiterate gather near readers, soaking in the atmosphere of dread like it is warmth from a fire. Let us talk about the psychological effect. The newspapers create a rhythm of fear, morning anxieties carried into evening conversations. People start crafting their routines around the latest theories. Avoid certain alleys. Avoid walking alone. Avoid men with bags. Avoid men without bags. Avoid anyone with a coat that is too long or too short. You feel the shift in the air each time a new edition drops. A collective tightening. A collective shiver. The city reacts not to the truth, but to the headlines reporting half-truths. Because in Whitechapel, the newspapers don't just report fear, they manufacture it, they distribute it, they amplify it. And you read every word with trembling hands because not knowing is terrifying, but knowing what they've printed is somehow worse. Your walk home becomes a high-stakes game of, is that a person or a coat on a fence? And the worst part? Half the time you guess wrong, because in Whitechapel at night, the fog eats outlines, your nerves magnify shadows, and every object gains the potential to ruin your evening. You wrap your coat tighter, tilt your head low, and begin the journey, the slow, cautious shuffle of someone who wishes very deeply to teleport instead. Let's talk about your senses. They become obnoxiously sharp. Your hearing suddenly works like it's auditioning for a job. A soft crack in the distance. You spin. A faint footstep 5 houses away. You freeze. Someone coughs behind a wall. You consider updating your last will and testament. Even your peripheral vision upgrades to paranoid owl. Each step feels loud. Too loud. The cobblestones beneath you click under your boots like they're tattling on your location. You try stepping lighter, which only makes you wobble like a baby deer learning physics. The street stretches ahead, empty, quiet, heavy with fog. You tell yourself, you're fine, totally fine, everything is fine. But your hands have already begun rehearsing their panic sweat. Let's talk about shapes. They're your greatest enemies. A barrel becomes a crouching man. A lamppost becomes someone standing perfectly still. A dangling curtain becomes a cloaked figure. You squint. You step sideways. You lean in cautiously. Your brain whispers, "Don't do it." But your curiosity whispers even louder. What if it's a person? It's never a person, except when it is. That's the problem. Uncertainty is the air you breathe now. Let S talk about other pedestrians, because the few people you do pass on the streets of Whitechapel are equally terrified. Everyone walks fast. Everyone avoids eye contact. Everyone glances behind themselves every few seconds. When two strangers approach each other at night, both slow dramatically, sizing one another up like two cats deciding whether to fight or sprint. You try the polite nod. They don't nod back. You step to the side. They step the same way. You both do the awkward Victorian sidestep dance until one of you commits to a direction out of pure social panic. Let us talk about your imagination. It's not your friend. It starts composing dramatic scenarios without your consent. You hear a footstep echo behind you and imagine a shadowy figure. The fog swirls oddly, and you picture someone emerging from it. A cat knocks over a tin bucket, and your brain immediately screams, "This is how it ends." But your imagination also rewrites reality in ridiculous ways. You see a coat hanging on a fence and swear it has a human shape. You walk closer, heart pounding, only to realize it is just fabric. You exhale in relief, then realize it is your coat, you hung it there earlier. Now you are terrified of your own belongings. Let's talk about the wind. The wind is rude. It whips around corners carrying bits of trash that dart across your path like sprinting goblins. It pushes your hat, tugs your scarf, and whistles through alleyways in a way that sounds exactly like someone whispering your name. You tell yourself it's just the breeze, but the breeze seems far too invested in your emotional deterioration. Then there's the silence, the deep, thick, unnatural quiet that Whitechapel sometimes sinks into after the newspapers drop their latest horrifying details. In that silence, every small sound becomes dramatic. A boot scrape, a door latch, your own breathing. Let us talk about the turning point when you speed up. It always happens. Something behind you shifts, or maybe you imagine it. Either way, your walk goes from calm stroll to respectful power walk of survival. You don't run, you're not panicking. You're simply accelerating, rapidly. Your boots hit the ground faster. Your heart sinks to their rhythm. Your breath fogs out in quick bursts. And the whole time, you pretend it's normal, totally normal to walk like you're being chased by nothing and everything simultaneously. Let us talk about that moment of relief when you see the faint outline of home. The window, the crooked door, the familiar worn stone steps. Your muscles unclench all at once, leaving you weak-kneed and slightly embarrassed. You fumble with the latch, slip inside, shut the door, lean against it, and exhale. One long, shaky sigh. You made it. Again. And no matter how many nights pass, this ritual repeats because in Whitechapel, walking home isn't just a commute. It is a nightly adventure your nerves absolutely did not sign up for. Between the fog, poor lighting, and the fact that everyone was half asleep and overworked, it's a miracle anyone saw anything in Whitechapel, let alone a man who didn't want to be seen. This is the part people forget. It wasn't just fear that kept the killer invisible. It was the environment, the conditions, the exhaustion, the absolute sensory chaos of Victorian life. If you dropped a modern person here with night vision goggles and a flashlight the size of a small cannon, they'd still lose track of someone within 30 seconds. Let us then talk about the lighting, or the pathetic excuse for it. Gas lamps flickered weakly at wide intervals, casting more anxiety than actual illumination. Between lamps there were long stretches of pure darkness. Darkness so thick it felt like a physical object you had to walk through. Anyone walking fast, walking softly, or simply wearing dark clothes could disappear with laughable ease. One step into a shadow and poof, gone, like a Victorian magic trick without the top hat. Then there's the fog, the eternal, suffocating, house-eating fog. It didn't drift gently. It devoured streets. It curled around your ankles, blurred your vision, twisted the light, softened footsteps, and made everyone look like a smudged charcoal sketch. If a man stepped 10 feet away from a lamppost, he might as well have left the country. Let us talk about sleep deprivation. Victorians are tired, chronically tired. Their workdays are long, their nights are stressful, and their bodies operate on the kind of NG levels you normally see in malfunctioning appliances. People walk around half-conscious, heads foggy, senses dulled. You expect them to produce accurate statements like, "He was about 5'8", with a dark coat and a solemn face." But realistically, their eyewitness accounts sound more like, "He was man-shaped, maybe tall, maybe not tall. He had a hat, I think. It was dark. I was tired. Please let me sit down." Let's talk about distraction. The streets are loud even when they are quiet. You're listening for footsteps behind you. You're checking shadows. You're avoiding puddles that look suspicious. Your nerves are doing gymnastics. In that state, you don't analyze details, you survive. You notice movement, not facial features. You see silhouettes, not identities. And then there's the killer himself. Whoever he was, he moved strategically, quickly, quietly. He understood the streets better than anyone. He chose the darkest corners, the thickest fog, the earliest hours. He struck when people were drunk, drowsy, or hurrying. He didn't linger. He didn't posture. He didn't give anyone the luxury of a long look. Let's talk about clothing. Men in Whitechapel dress similarly. Dark coats, hats pulled low, scarves wrapped tight. From a distance, every working-class man looked identical, just a silhouette with slightly different hat geometry. Even if someone did glimpse the killer, they were probably looking at the same outline worn by 100 other men on their street. Not exactly helpful. Add to that the chaos surrounding each crime. Crowds gathering, police shouting, reporters elbowing their way in like hungry penguins. Witnesses panic. Details blur. People remember the fear far more vividly than the face. Let us talk about human memory because it's just not your friend here. In the stress of the moment, the brain misfires. What you think you saw becomes what you swear you saw. A man with a mustache becomes a man with a beard. A short coat becomes a long coat. A hat becomes a hood. Fog turns illusions into false memories, and shadows rearrange themselves like creatures with a sense of humour. And then, of course, there's the most chilling part. People didn't realise they'd seen him until it was too late. He blended into the crowd. He walked beside them, held doors for them, passed them on the street. He didn't radiate villain energy. He wasn't glowing in the dark. He wasn't surrounded by dramatic music. He was ordinary enough to slip through Whitechapel unnoticed. That is the real horror. Not that no one saw him, but that everyone might have. And no one knew. Every man with a moustache becomes suspicious. Every man without a moustache becomes even more suspicious. That the delightful paranoia cocktail you were sipping in Whitechapel, no facial hair, suspicious. Too much facial hair, extremely suspicious. Average amount of facial hair, suspicious in a way that feels intentional. Victorian London is a giant Wes Waldo book, except everyone looks like Waldo-esque exhausted cousin who just finished a 14-hour shift and might also be a murderer. Let us talk about the facial hair problem. The newspapers have convinced people the killer is a mustached gentleman, or a clean-shaven labourer, or a man with sideburns so lush they deserve their own address. The theories change daily, which means suspicion spreads like mould on bread, fast, unevenly, and in places you didn't expect. You pass a man with a thick handlebar mustache, your brain, guilty. You pass a man with no mustache whatsoever, your brain, even guiltier. Then you pass a man with patchy stubble, your brain. He's trying to grow a disguise. Arrest him immediately. Let us talk about strangers in general. Whitechapel is packed. People come and go constantly, dock workers, sailors, migrants, traders, peddlers, artisans, drifters. The district churns with movement. It is normal to see unfamiliar faces, but once fear sets in, your tolerance for unfamiliar faces plummets. Strangers who once blended in suddenly feel like walking mysteries. You catch sight of a tall man in a dark coat standing under a lamp. You immediately assume the worst. He could just be waiting for someone, or thinking, or breathing. But in this atmosphere, simple acts like standing still become ominous. Let us talk about body language. Anyone walking too fast, suspicious. Anyone walking too slow, suspicious with intention. Anyone walking at a perfectly reasonable pace, suspiciously reasonable. You've become a body language detective with no training and terrible instincts. Take the man lingering near a corner. Is he waiting for a friend? Taking a break? Planning a crime? Hard to tell. Then again, in this fog, someone could stop to tie their shoe and accidentally start a small panic. Let's talk about accents. One paper claims the killer is foreign. Another insists he's a local, which means now everyone is suspect. A man with a thick East End accent gets side eyes because he sounds too comfortable. A man with a foreign accent gets extra side eyes because, well, he sounds foreign. Even a guy with a mild cough suddenly feels like a threat. Nobody trusts anyone who clears their throat too quietly. Let S talk about the clothes. Men wear the same dark coats, caps, scarves, and boots. The fashion here does not promote individuality, it promotes blending in. So the moment bad things start happening, people begin searching for differences that don't actually exist. You watch neighbours inspect strangers like they were trying to memorize a lineup. And it's not just you. The whole neighbourhood is on high alert. Women link arms when strangers approach. Men turn to watch newcomers over their shoulders. Children are told not to talk to anyone unless they can name at least 3 people who can vouch for them. Even dogs grow suspicious barking at passers-by who smell slightly unfamiliar. Let us talk about rumours. They swirl like fog. Someone whispers that a mysterious gentleman has been seen lurking behind the butcheress shop. Someone else claims a strange foreigner rented a room nearby and only goes out after midnight. A third person says a thin man with a peculiar hat was caught staring into windows. None of these rumours are ever verified. All of them spread instantly. Before long, the mysterious gentleman, the foreigner, and the man with the strange hat have merged into one nightmare super suspect in the public imagination. Let us talk about the psychological effect. Suspicion becomes a background hum, a constant presence like tinnitus of the soul. You start mentally cataloguing the strangers you pass. Height, hair colour, coat style, level of suspiciousness. It doesn't help. It only makes you more aware of how many strangers exist. And then there's the darkest thought. What if the stranger you're afraid of isn't actually a stranger? What if the killer is someone you've passed 100 times? Someone who blends in perfectly. Someone whose face you've never memorized because there was nothing unusual about them. Because in Whitechapel, sometimes the scariest people aren't the mysterious strangers. They are the ordinary ones. Constables trudge around with aching feet and 0 clues, sending up prayers that their shift ends before something weird happens again. Imagine being a Victorian constable. You're underpaid, undertrained, and overworked. Your equipment consists of a wooden baton, a whistle that only half works, and a lantern that flickers like it's afraid of commitment. You don't have radios, you don't have forensic science, and you definitely don't have backup arriving in 30 seconds like in modern police dramas. You have your boots, your wits, and the desperate hope that nothing happens while you're on duty. Let's talk about the boots. They are heavy, they are stiff, they rub blisters onto blisters. Every Constable S walk has a distinct shuffle that says, "I regret all my life choices. Cobblestones do not help. Rain does not help. Fog definitely does not help." You spend all night trudging the same beats-long stretches of dimly lit roads where nothing happens for hours until suddenly everything happens in 5 seconds flat. And you're always at least 200 yards away when it does. Let us talk about training. You didn't get much. A few weeks of instruction, some drills, a uniform fitting, and then bam, you're in Whitechapel, expected to solve crimes while armed with instincts you're not entirely sure you have. Your sergeant gives you pep talks that sound more like apologies. And when the murders start, the pressure becomes unbearable. Everyone expects you to know something, anything. But the truth is, you know exactly as much as everyone else. Nothing. Maybe less. Witnesses give contradictory descriptions. The fog hides everything. Evidence disappears before sunrise, and the newspapers keep publishing headlines like "Police baffled again," which does wonders for morale. Let us talk about fear. Constables, one, admit they're scared, at least not loudly, but you can see it in their posture, in the way they tighten their grip on their lantern, in the way they turn corners slowly, sweeping the darkness like it personally insulted them. Even a stray cat can make a constable jump if it appears at the wrong moment. Night shifts feel endless. You patrol alleys that look identical. You hear footsteps that don't match your own. You constantly check behind you, not because you expect danger, but because everyone else is staring behind them, and you don't want to look like the only one who doesn't care. Let us talk about communication. If something happens, you blow your whistle and hope another constable hears it. If they don't, you run, or you improvise, or you pray. There are no phones, no radios, no maps with little pins in them. Information spreads by word of mouth and hopeful guessing. Imagine trying to coordinate hundreds of officers with the same accuracy as a chain of children whispering secrets in a circle. That's Victorian policing. Let's talk about the public. They are panicked. They are loud. They are angry. They give advice that is both unhelpful and unsolicited. Watch that alley, someone says. This suspicious man walked there 3 days ago. Or my cousin overheard a butcher say he heard someone say they saw something. Or the classic, you should really catch him. Thank you. Very helpful. Constables have to remain calm, polite and professional while internally screaming. It's a miracle their mustaches do not fall off from the stress. Let's talk about the exhaustion. After hours of walking, questioning strangers, separating drunks, calming nervous residents, and writing notes in dim light, you finally reach the end of your shift. Your feet throb. Your back aches. Your eyes burn. You want nothing more than a hot meal and 6 uninterrupted hours of sleep. But there is always the fear, the dread that something happened while you weren't there, that people will blame you, that tomorrow's newspaper will say constables fail again, in letters so large you can read them from space, if space travel existed. Because in Whitechapel, constables aren't just patrolling the streets. They're patrolling a city holding its breath, a city expecting answers, a city afraid of the dark and expecting them to keep the lights on. Fear becomes just another part of your daily life, as normal as the cold, the noise, and the existential dread baked into 1888 London. At first, the panic feels sharp, electric, a sudden jolt of terror every time a headline appears or a shadow shifts wrong. But after a while, something strange happens. The fear stops being a spike and becomes a steady hum like background static in your brain. You don't stop being scared, you just get used to being scared, which is somehow worse. Let's talk about your mornings. You wake up to the usual sounds, neighbours shouting, someone coughing up Victorian lung soup, a baby crying, a cart rumbling past. But now, layered under all that, is the routine dread of knowing the newspapers are printing new headlines. You step out the door expecting another horrifying story. When there isn't one, you feel relieved. When there is one, well, you expected that too. Fear becomes predictable. It becomes part of the schedule. Let's talk about conversations. Panic is the new small talk. People don't chat about the weather unless it has directly affected how terrified they are. Fog is thicker today, awful night. For being murdered, isn't it? Even children sense it. They play games like Catch the Ripper and reenact dramatic newspaper sketches with deeply concerning accuracy. Victorian childhood is just fear, dirt, and yelling. The murders simply give them a theme. Adults cope through repetition. The same questions circle endlessly. Did they catch him? No. Do they know anything? No. Then how am I supposed to walk home? You just do. Let's talk about your body. Constant fear leaves you in a strange physical state, always a little tense. Shoulders permanently hovering near your ears. Stomach clenched like you swallowed a paperweight. You're jumpy but also weirdly numb. A door slams and you leap like a startled cat. Moments later, someone knocks over a tray behind you and you barely blink. Panic fatigue kicks in. Your nerves start running on fumes. Your reflexes are confused. Everything startles you, except the things that should. Let S talk about nighttime routines. You wrap your scarf tighter. You choose streets you normally avoid because they have slightly better light. You walk faster, even when you are not late. You check behind you reflexively every few steps. You hold your breath when passing dark alleys like it is going to make you more aerodynamic, but because everyone else is doing the same thing, it stops feeling unusual. It just becomes London. Let S talk about shopping. Even simple errands become outings of caution. You go to the market in pairs now. Women walk arm in arm like a Victorian buddy system. Men stick to main streets even when shortcuts are faster. Vendors talk about suspects as casually as they talk about produce. 2 onions and a rumour for you, love. Even in moments that should be peaceful, like having tea or sitting by a fire, you can feel the tension under the surface. People sip, chat, stir sugar, and pretend they were relaxed. But their eyes flick toward windows. Their sentences trail off when they hear footsteps outside. The fear never fully leaves the room. It just sits politely in the corner like an unwanted guest. Let's talk about the psychology of routine terror. Humans adapt quickly, too quickly sometimes. You learn to store fear the way you store winter clothes. Always nearby, always ready. You stop having full-blown panic and instead settle into low-grade dread. Is not fight or flight. It's more like fight, flight, or exist uneasily. And here's the wild part. Eventually, experiencing no fear at all becomes unsettling. If a night passes where you don't feel nervous, you start wondering if something's wrong. If the fog lifts, you stand there squinting at the clear air like it betrayed you. If you walk home without hearing a single suspicious sound, you get paranoid that this is a setup. Let S talk about what that means. You don't stop being afraid of the killer. You start being afraid of what it means when the fear changes. Because in 1888, London, panic isn't a reaction anymore. It is a habit, a routine, a way of life woven into the very fabric of the city. People communicate in a delicate ecosystem of rumours, nods, murmurs, and unsolicited advice shouted across markets. Whitechapel doesn't. You have social media, but it absolutely has the world's earliest version of it, an organic, living, breathing rumour network built entirely on human panic and the Victorian urge to overshare. You don't need newspapers to stay informed. You just have to step outside. The streets themselves are basically one long comment section, messy, emotional, occasionally helpful, and full of people who are very confident about things they absolutely cannot prove. Let S talk about how fast rumours spread. It's astonishing. You can whisper something to a friend in Spitalfields, and by the time you walk to Whitechapel Road, 3 strangers are already discussing your whisper like it's breaking news. A butcher hears something from a customer, tells it to a baker, who tells it to a fishmonger, who tells it to someone's grandmother, who then delivers the final distorted version loudly to her neighbours while shaking her fist at the sky. This is Whitechapel Wi-Fi, and the signal is always strong. Let's talk about the mechanics. In the morning, people nod at each other gravely tight, serious nods that mean, yes, I too have heard the latest disturbing thing. By midday, the information evolves, fragmenting into 5 competing versions. By evening, people are whispering in doorways, huddled over pints in taverns, stopping strangers in the street to say things like, "Be careful, the killer only strikes when the moon looks slightly judgmental." Let's talk about the murmurs. Murmurs carry further than normal voices. They slip across markets, under carts, through alleyways. You don't always hear the words, but you hear the tone low, tense, urgent. The whole district hums with half-heard sentences. They say he vanished, a woman saw him, or someone like him, my cousin swears it is like living inside a giant Victorian beehive powered entirely by gossip and adrenaline. Let S talk about unsolicited advice. This is where the network truly shines. People shout warnings the way modern people share memes constantly, loudly, and often without verifying anything. You'll be walking to buy bread, and someone you've never met leans out of a window to yell, "Don't take Duke's Court tonight." A man with a suspicious walk was seen there. You look up, startled. You've never seen this woman before. She's watering her plants. She might be wearing curlers, but she's absolutely certain she knows something you need to hear. And naturally, you take her advice. Everyone always does. Let us talk about the market. Oh, the market is a rumour factory. Fruits, veggies, fish, and fear sold side by side. Vendors shout over each other with competing theories while handing you onions. A fish seller tells you the killer is a doctor. The bread man insists it's a sailor. The woman selling candles claims he is a ghost. And the man selling eels. He says nothing, but his eyebrows imply he knows everything. Let's talk about coded communication. Not all conversations are spoken. Some are performed through gestures. The quick tug of a scarf, a cautious tilt of the head, a pointed look toward an alley. These tiny signals pass between friends, neighbours, strangers, everyone silently warning everyone else without making a scene. It's Victorian semaphore powered by anxiety. Let's talk about anonymity. Nobody knows who started which rumour, and honestly, nobody cares. The Whisper Network isn't about accuracy. It's about survival. It's about filling the silence with something. Anything. Even if it is nonsense, because having a theory feels safer than having nothing. And this network, imperfect as it is, actually works. It keeps people alert. It reminds them not to walk alone. It spreads information faster than the police ever could. It keeps the community connected, even when fear tries to pull everyone apart. Let's talk about the beauty hidden in all this chaos. Under the fear and hysteria, the Whisper Network is really just people looking out for each other, sharing what they know, what they think, what they imagine. Because even if their information is wrong, their intentions aren't. In Whitechapel, where danger hides in shadow and fog, whispers become lifelines, rumours become warnings, and every quiet murmur in the night is someone somewhere trying to keep someone else safe. Some stick together in groups, others walk fast, others walk faster. One man starts carrying a stick so small it could only annoy someone, not protect him. Everyone in Whitechapel is improvising their own safety plan, and none of these plans are good. Effective self-defense options in 1888 are limited. You don't have pepper spray, no smartphones, no personal alarms, just fear, fog, and whatever random object you can hold with conviction, which explains why a grown man is confidently strutting down the street wielding a wooden spoon like it's Excalibur. Let's talk about the buddy system. People suddenly rediscover friendship, intense, clingy friendship. Women walk together in groups of 3 or 4, linking arms with a grip so tight it could dislocate elbows. Men stroll in little herds too, pretending they're not scared while aggressively standing closer than usual. If you walk alone after dark now, you're either reckless, extremely late for something, or dramatically committed to denial. Let's talk about walking speed. It becomes a competitive sport. Your normal pace is gone, replaced by a brisk, purposeful march that screams, "I have somewhere to be, and I want to remain alive while getting there." You don't stop to talk to anyone. You don't glance in windows. If someone calls your name, you pretend you didn't hear them. The goal is simple: minimize exposure to possible doom. Some people take it further. They walk with the aerodynamic intensity of someone trying to outrun their own taxes. They glide. They scurry. One man even jogs, which is suspicious in its own way, because nobody jogs in the 1880s unless something is chasing them. Let us talk about improvised weapons. This is where Whitechapel truly shines. People start carrying anything they think might help. A broom handle, a heavy book, a coal shovel, a decorative umbrella that's too flimsy to intimidate even a pigeon, a rolling pin a woman wields with the confidence of someone who's seen things, And of course, the man with the tiny stick. The stick is about 6 inches long, a twig practically. But he holds it sternly, as though its smallness makes it more powerful, like a concentrated beam of annoyance. If attacked, he would absolutely poke someone in the elbow and hope they reconsider their life choices. Let us talk about light. Darkness is the enemy, so people bring lanterns everywhere. The streets glow with dozens of shaky yellow orbs, bobbing through the fog like haunted fireflies. But lanterns don't help much. They illuminate about 2 feet in front of you and simultaneously advertise your exact location to the universe. Still, Whitechapel residents cling to them like emotional support light sources. Let us talk about route planning. Suddenly, everyone becomes a professional strategist. You memorize which streets are well lit, which have night workers present, which have at least one pub still open, and which corners are rumoured to be haunted. You avoid alleys entirely, even the short ones that cut 10 minutes off your commute. People even start timing their walks to align with constable patrols. You'll see someone standing perfectly still on a corner, pretending to admire a wall, just so they can casually coincidentally walk behind a constable for the length of a few city blocks. Let us talk about superstition. Fear leads to creative rituals. People start carrying charms, a silver coin, a button from a lost coat, a scrap of lace tied around the wrist. Someone whispers that wearing a sprig of rosemary keeps danger away. Someone else claims you should hum softly while walking. Others insist you should never make eye contact with anyone. After dusk, just stare at the ground and keep moving. It's a magical thinking layered over practical fear. And honestly, you embrace it. Because logic is cold comfort in a neighbourhood where rational safety measures ended 3 headlines ago. Let us talk about the communal aspect. Despite the panic, people look out for each other more than ever. Doors stay open a little later. Windows creak as faces peek out to check if neighbours get home safely. Someone always stands watch near the tavern. People ask, "Where are you headed?" Not to pry, but to make sure you don't vanish into the fog alone. Fear turns strangers into allies. Anxiety turns everyday actions into survival strategies. And walking home becomes less about reaching a destination and more about staying visible, alert, armed with dubious objects and surrounded by other humans who don't want you to die tonight. Even when the killings slow to a halt, the fear lingers echoing in alleyways, whispering through fog, clinging to the cobblestones like the city itself hasn't exhaled yet. Most stories have endings, clean ones, satisfying ones, conclusions that let people move on with their lives. But Whitechapel doesn't get that luxury. The murders don't stop with a dramatic arrest or a deathbed confession. They just fade, like a lamp flickering out, like the fog dissolving at dawn only to slink back again the next night. One day there's a new headline, the next day there isn't, and somehow that's even more unsettling. Let's talk about the silence. It doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly. First, there are fewer whispers in the taverns, then fewer nervous glances in the marketplace. The patrol whistles blow less often. Eventually, the newspapers move on, shifting to other scandals, other outrages, other things to panic about. But the quiet doesn't feel peaceful. It feels suspended, like the whole district is waiting for something to happen that never does. You walk the streets, and the absence itself becomes eerie. No new fears, no new theories, no new suspects. You realize how accustomed you were to the adrenaline, how the routine panic had become part of your schedule. Without it, your brain scrambles for meaning. Silence becomes a new kind of noise. Let's talk about the people. Whitechapel residents don't celebrate the end. They don't throw parties or give speeches. Instead, they pause, hesitant, wary, grateful but careful not to say it out loud, as if acknowledging the quiet might break the spell. Neighbours still walk in pairs after dark. Women still avoid alleys. Men still carry sticks they pretend are weapons. The habits linger because nobody knows why the murderer stopped. Did he die? Did he leave? Did he simply get bored? These questions settle into everyone's mind like dust. You don't talk about them, but you feel them. Let's talk about memory. It lingers in certain corners, those narrow alleys where fog hangs too heavily, those streets where lanterns flicker for no reason, those quiet hours before dawn. You pass certain spots and your chest tightens even though nothing is wrong. The fear has carved itself into the geography. Some people refuse to walk certain routes forever. Others insist on lighting candles in windows for months. The local children grow up hearing warnings that no longer make sense but still carry weight. Don't linger after dark. Stay on the main road. Beware of quiet footsteps. Let us talk about conversations. They shift from frantic speculation to cautious reflection. People recall where they were during the worst nights, who they walked home with, which rumours they believed. The tavern talk becomes nostalgic in the strangest way, like discussing a storm you survived, knowing it could have been worse. There's relief, yes, but there's also embarrassment, because part of you got used to the fear. Part of you expected it daily. Now you were standing here in quieter streets, suddenly aware of how tightly you'd have been holding your own nerves, like someone releasing a fist they didn't realise was clenched. Let's talk about the city. Whitechapel doesn't magically brighten. It remains poor, overcrowded, cold, and chaotic. The fog continues to roll in like an overeager background character, but something shifts in the air just barely. People breathe differently. Not freely, but less shallow. They laugh louder. Windows stay open a little later. Life resumes its ordinary difficulties without the sharp edge of terror constantly pressing against them. But the fear doesn't vanish. It simply recedes into the foundation. It becomes a ghost, one that doesn't haunt you actively but never truly leaves. When someone walks too quietly behind you, you still flinch. When the fog gets unusually thick, you still quicken your pace. When a stranger pauses too long under a lamp, your heart stutters, because the danger isn't what lingers. The uncertainty does. That awful Victorian uncertainty that the monster was never caught, that he walked these same streets, that he could have been anyone and that he simply moved on. Whitechapel moves forward, yes, but the quiet, it never quite comforts. And now, as we drift gently out of the fog-soaked streets of Victorian Whitechapel, take a slow breath. Let your shoulders drop. Let the tension ease out of your jaw, because you've just survived a full day and night in one of history's most unsettling neighbourhoods. You walk through the cold, the chaos, the nerves, the ridiculous rumours, the wobbly lanterns, and the questionable stew. You navigated alleys that curved wrong, strangers who walked too quietly, and newspapers that printed fear with the enthusiasm of a toddler smearing paint on a wall. You witnessed how a city can live in terror, not just because of a killer, but because life back then stacked danger on top of discomfort, on top of please don't let the fog eat me. And yet people endured. They worked. They whispered, they stayed together, they laughed when they could, worried when they had to, and kept moving forward even when it felt like walking through a nightmare drawn in charcoal. The resilience of those who lived in that time is astonishing when you think about it. They faced poverty, overcrowding, pollution, and fear on a scale most of us can barely imagine, and they still found ways to look out for each other, to warn neighbours, to share food, to survive. So tonight, as you settle into a soft bed, clean sheets, quiet room, steady electricity, maybe take a moment to appreciate the small mercies of modern life. The locks on your doors, the clarity of your lights, the absence of ominous Victorian fog drifting into your living room, the fact that if you hear footsteps behind you, it's probably just your cat and not someone mysteriously blending into the shadows. Because history may be grim, chaotic, and occasionally ridiculous, but it also reminds us how far we've come and how lucky we are to sleep in safety. Rest well. breathe deeply and let the past fade into quiet. Good night.